Is it kind of just like FaceTime? It's just...
Yeah, I started the recording, so this is, it'll just record, and when I turn off the computer, it saves a copy, and then I upload it to YouTube. So we probably should introduce ourselves to anyone who's watching. I'm Edwin Rutsch, Director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and been working for about 12, 13 years on the topic of empathy and interviewing people trying to build a more empathic culture. And you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Jessica Shively, and I'm a graduate student at Morningside College online program, and I'm going for my Master's of Teaching. So I'm just working on a project right now where I teach students how to increase their empathy. And one of the components is including an expert. So that's why I contacted you, because you are an empathy expert. So.
Oh, great. Yeah, and then you already interviewed me. We just wanted to record this. If anyone wants to see it, I'll post it up on Facebook and YouTube. And yeah, so you want to just give an outline of what your project is, and just
Absolutely.
Lead away.
Yeah, so we were asked to select an authentic task for our students and then create small groups, and then further create small group activities that would solve or work towards the authentic task or problem. So it could be anything. One girl's doing it on, how bees are leaving and that we need to get more. So I just am very interested in empathy and building empathy in children. And I'm an elementary school art teacher, so I'm always looking to build their empathy. And so that was my authentic task, was to give the children the task of increasing empathy in the student body throughout their school. So I was excited to contact you and ask you if you, and I don't know if you work with small children ever, but I do K through 5th grade. So
okay.
I was just curious if you had any activities that you would recommend, or books that you would recommend either for teachers to access or even to read to children. Just interested if you, like what sorts of, if you were to be hooked up with my small group, like what sorts of contributions could you make, and how would you best communicate with them? What would be your preferred mode of communication? And I was curious if you're aware of any like formal conflict resolution strategies that use empathy.
Okay, so it's really around the K through 5, you're saying?
Yeah, K through 5
area
would be awesome if we could stick with that.
Yeah,
but
keep that.
K-12 is fine too.
Okay, sure. That's not really, haven't really focused on that area. It's been more adults that I've worked with. There are programs like Roots of Empathy. I don't know if you've heard of that program, but it's a woman, Mary Gordon. She started the program in Toronto, Canada. And it's actually, for about that age group, I think, that you're talking about. And what they do is they bring in a mother and a newborn, not totally, just young baby. And then they lay out this green blanket on the classroom floor. And they have a whole process for introducing, the mother and the baby. And then they sit in the middle, and then the children in a circle sit around and just observe the baby and how it interacts. And the idea is that bond is a very empathic, caring bond, because the mother has to observe be always empathizing with the needs of the child. And then it creates a sort of a circle process for the children to be able to talk about their feelings by talking about what the baby might be feeling. So she wrote a book called Roots of Empathy, and that's sort of introductory, for, I think it's like, 1st grade, 2nd grade children I've seen, and I'm not quite sure what exactly the program is.
Okay.
So that's sort of one program that fits, and she spread, that program all around the world. So there's It's all over Canada. It's in the United States and in Europe and other countries. There's another person that works in the field of empathy and younger children, Michelle Borba. She has a book called Unselfie. So she's been giving trainings and talks and has a website as well for kind of resources. So there's various books, kind of academic books about empathy in schools. And then you were talking about books. I didn't know if you meant like books for children.
Yeah, like Having Filled a Bucket Today, maybe like that type of book.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know if there were more that you would recommend. Again, I know you don't work with small.
Yeah, I don't. I do track. I have like a Google alert, so I track every day. I kind of see what articles have been written about empathy, and then I post those into what they call Scoop It. It's sort of it tracks. It gets a little snapshot of every article, and then I sort it into different categories. And one of them is empathy and parenting, empathy and education. So I do come across, there's a kind of sort of a movement or groups that are doing books about empathy that are sort of narrative books, story books, and then they're supposed to teach empathy, and I see those all the time.
Okay.
But I haven't really read them. And so what I did find is that a lot of the books that say they're about empathy, that they're not really about sort of a deeper empathy. It's like it's like if there's a bully, you stand up to the bully, and and they don't have like skills of really how do you empathize with the different sides and use empathy. So I think a lot of the books that sort of claim to be about empathy at a deeper level don't really kind of capture there might be like judgment or, other kind of attitudes in them. So I haven't really evaluated those books, but there are whole lists of these books. They'll say like 10 books or 20 books for, children. So it would be good to have someone who really was really understood the depths of empathy to be able to evaluate those. And I haven't done that.
Oh, no. Thank you for sharing. Are there any specific activities that you think teachers could lead with students? I've heard of the Cross the Line game. I don't know if that would qualify, but I was curious if you knew any other activities.
Yeah. So I do something kind of the very core practice that I do is empathic listening or active listening. I don't know if you might have heard that. It's called active listening, reflective listening, empathic listening. These are different terms for it. And sort of a real pioneer in this area was Carl Rogers. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's considered to be one of the top 3 or 4 clinical psychologists in the world, and who he was. I mean, he's passed away, but he did empathic listening with his clients. So someone would speak, he would just sit there and just listen to him, and periodically reflect back his understanding of what the person said.
Okay.
And this has sort of taken over, pretty much all of the healing, the psychology healing. If you go to a therapist, that's at the core of what they're doing. They're with you, they're being present, they're hearing you. And if you look at like mediation, conflict mediation, that's the core of it as well, as being able to, as a mediator, listen to the different parties and then get them to really listen to each other. So this empathic listening is one of the most powerful practices that I know of, and that's really kind of the core of foundation of the work that I'm trying to promote. And we do what we call an empathy circle. So we get small groups, and this is like with adults. where one person speaks. Let's say we like about 4 people in a circle. So if one person speaks and they select who they're going to speak to, and they can talk about whatever's up for them, alive for them. And the person that's listening reflects back their understanding, like, oh, I hear you say that you have concerns and you're feeling stressed, or whatever it is that the person is sharing. And then until the speaker feels like they've been heard, then it's the turn of the listener to select someone to speak to, and they reflect that back. The listener reflects back what the speaker is hearing, and then we go around like that. You just keep switching from person to person. And I just find that one of the best practices for kind of learning and practicing empathy, as well as for everyone to be heard. So we're doing, for example, some mediation, or we have what we call the empathy tent. So I'm in Berkeley area, and you might have heard of the right-wing political groups they've been coming to Berkeley, and then the left wing, they're having knockdown, drag out street fights.
Right.
And we take the empathy tent there, and we offer listening to both sides, and they're also trying to mediate between the sides. And so there's going to be another rally August 5th, and we're sort of preparing for that. So we put out a call, said whoever would like to be heard, we're willing to listen to you. So someone on the right wanted to do was willing to take part in an empathy circle. And so this afternoon, I'm going to be doing some listening. I'll do like 30 minutes of just listening to him about whatever's up for him using this empathic listening process. And then we'll do the same for the other side, and then we will bring them together to do mutual empathic listening, to kind of try to dialogue with each other, to hear each other.
Okay.
So
I saw some pictures on your website of that. That looks like a great cause. Great activity.
So but it's totally scalable for children, I think, too. So, for example, I don't have children, but I have 5 nephews and 6 actually, nephews and nieces. And they're at that age group that you're talking about. So like on my brother's family, the kids, they all kind of beat up on each other. It's just a constant beating up on each other. It's like horrible. And so I try to bring in this empathic approach to them. And if they're starting to fight with each other, I start listening to one and say, well, what's going on? I said, well, she took my popsicle. It was my popsicle, and she took it, and so okay, so she took, Annie, sister took your popsicle and ate it, and you're feeling upset about that. That's right. I don't. That was my popsicle. I didn't. She took it. It's okay. You're really upset because she took your popsicle. And then I listened to Annie. He says, well, I was hungry. I wanted it. I didn't know. And so you listen to both sides. And then I get them to listen to each other, to do empathic listening with each other. And then my little niece, she's only 5 years old, at the end of this, she says, I like empathy circles. Let's do it again.
That's awesome.
So really young, kids can pick up on this and learn it, and can really enjoy it because they get a chance to be heard, and they learn this. And it's like the core of the listening is for the sort of the healing, to be heard and seen and acknowledged of who you are, as well as the mutual listening is like really good for conflict resolution. So if there's a conflict, you bring the children together, and then they can work this out. So as a practice, I think that's like the number one. If you had like a class to divide the children into groups of 3 or 4, and then have them do this empathic listening practice, and then bring it in, eventually get them familiar with the process, to be heard about what's going on for, what's alive in them, kind of their concerns or hopes or joys or whatever. And then once they get really comfortable with that, start bringing in some conflicts. If there's some conflicts, that they can talk out the conflicts And so, you can kind of build on this, that first you want to hear what the issue is of the conflict, and then you want them to be able to negotiate, like what are they going to do about it. So I have a story about that, for example, with my nephew, who's, like about 7, and the niece is 5. So it actually happened. They had made little popsicles out of, ice popsicles, and they stick a little stick in, and they each had a popsicle, this ice cube, with a little flavoring in it. And then my niece, Annie, she's 5 years old, she took Teddy's popsicle and ate it, and he was really upset. So he ran to his room, and he was, laying on his bed like this, just really upset. And then my sister-in-law said, okay, Edwin, try out this empathy stuff with them. So she sat there and just watched. So I went over to Teddy, he was in bed. And I said, Teddy, do you want to talk about whatever, what's going on? And he said, no, you don't want to talk. I said, okay, so what I hear, Teddy, is that you don't want to talk about what's happening. Is that right? You're feeling really upset. And it's like, yeah, he just shakes his head. So I listened. He didn't even want to speak. He was so upset. So I just kind of reflected back what I was sort of reading his feelings were, and reflected back. And then Annie came up, and she's the 5-year-old, right? And she's there. And so I said, well, what's going on for you? And then she kind of shared, well, I saw this popsicle, and I thought I would eat it. And, I didn't know he'd be so upset. So I said, okay, so you just didn't realize he'd be upset, and, you're just kind of wanting the popsicle. And so I kind of went back and forth, a little bit. And then finally Teddy did start saying things. Then I said, well, okay, what do you want to do now? And then Teddy said, I want her to make me a new popsicle. And then Annie said, okay, I'll do that. And then they both got up and were happy and went running off, and kind of the conflict was resolved. And, usually in that family, it's like they're very, you're right, you're wrong, you get punished. And that's the resolution of it. And this is a very different approach of kind of talking it out, having the parties talk it out with each other, and coming up with a solution and taking action for that. And it's all based on this empathic listening. So I could imagine a classroom, that if you had a classroom that you could, with maybe 10, 12, students, I don't know how many's in a classroom nowadays, but could be 20. So you divide the group, divide the classroom into, little groups of 3 or 4, and that they would practice this empathic listening with each other, and try it every day to, start with a little bit of this time for doing it and practicing it. And then when a conflict happens, then you bring the conflict into this circle. Everyone's already practiced and is trusting the process. And it's kind of like the core. It's like the first step, the beginning. And then from there, you can add all kinds of other, tools on top of that. So, yeah.
Do you think it's important to keep the mediator involved, or would the end goal be that they could do the empathic listening alone with each other? So if 2 kids are having a conflict, would you say it's better to have a mediator there, or for them to grow to be able to do it themselves?
I think the goal is for them to be able to do it themselves, that they start learning the skills. So if they're out in the playground, it's like even now my nephews and nieces, when I'm there, they start fighting. I said, we have a conflict, what do we do? And they say, we have an empathy circle. So they're already starting to kind of integrate it. And so it's that integrating it. So I could imagine that, somebody on the playground say, we have a conflict, what do we do? And everyone's already familiar with an empathy circle. And they say, okay, we have an empathy circle, and they can just kind of work it out themselves. But there might be a little bit of, it takes some training to get to that point. So
That's awesome. Thank you. That's so very helpful. I think you already told me about Michelle Borba. Were there any other interviews that you've done where people have kind of focused on working with kids or?
Yeah, on the website, cultureofempathy.com, there is a section on empathy and education if you go under conferences.
Okay.
So it says education, and there's, various people who work in education. There's like, for example, there's a woman in New Zealand who they do sort of a safe touch work there, because it's when people need to have that physical touch. They have like massage, actually, so simple massages that the kids do for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And she has a whole program around that in New Zealand. And when you do have that physical connection, your body releases oxytocin,
right,
which is has that sort of healing aspect. So there's various programs, like there's Stand in My Shoes. There's a person, Bob Sorensen, and there's others. So, but there's not, that the two that I mentioned, I think there's the Start Empathy program. That's it. There's the Ashoka Foundation Center, or I don't know, their institute, Ashoka. They do sort of social entrepreneurship, and they started a program called Start Empathy. And that's actually their area that they're focusing on is K through 12. So actually, I had forgotten about that. I haven't heard much from them recently, but that is another organization.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. The last question I would say is just like a logistical one, but is this the preferred mode of communication? If I'm in Virginia, so if my small groups were hoping to interact with you, would video be the best way?
For having discussions like this?
Sure. Or I guess even if you were to teach them about the empathy, empathetic listening, like, would that be something that would be better to be pre-recorded and shared, or something where you would want to teach it and like take questions from them or input or anything like that?
Oh yeah, the best thing is just to do it. So we're starting a project on developing an empathy training MOOC, a online course. So we've got some teams. We have I think about it's like 13, 14 people. We have 4 teams, meet 4 times, different times during the week for a couple hours, and we're starting on developing this online training for empathy. And if you go to empathytent.com, there's a link to the training. So if you had a group that wanted to actually work on developing some curriculum, you could put together a team to sort of design that. And then we actually do a lot of listening. So the best way is just to do it, right? To practice. So we get a group together, and then we just practice empathic listening. And you just learn sort of by doing, and then you can spread it. You can facilitate your own circle once you kind of get practiced at it. And so we're really trying to develop, training material for doing this listening, empathic listening. And there's a whole, there's a basic listening, but you can get better and better at it. You start hearing, listening for deeper feelings and desires and needs, that values that people have. So there's a lot of skill building and getting better at the empathic listening, but there's just getting started is fairly easy. And I think just doing it and practicing it is, the best way to just get started.
Sure.
I don't know if you're interested. Are you going to do more training around empathy going forward? Or?
I'm not. This was just the
Mhm.
topic for my student diversity
Okay.
class that I got to choose. So if I'm presented the opportunity to choose my topic again, I might choose empathy because I do want to further that in my own teaching. But for now, I'm just taking those required
Mhm.
classes.
Oh,
So,
okay. Well,
yeah.
if you're doing art, like, when someone does like drawing of, when you do, a portrait drawing, I mean, that's very empathic, right? You're really trying to be sensitive to what are the feelings of that the person has. Who are they? What's their character? So you're really learning to read somebody's, feelings, and so that in itself is very good for, I think, sharpening your empathy, right?
Right.
Portraiture, drawing, and sketching. So that's like one thing, as well as there's art therapy, which Carl Rogers, who I mentioned before, his daughter had gone into art therapy, so she would do art therapy around with empathy. So what she did is, like, someone would be drawing, right? But while they're drawing, they would be talking about what they're doing, like they'd be doing a painting, and then the person would reflect back, offer empathic listening to the person that is doing the art, so that they could use the art as a way of tapping into their felt experience, and then they would get a reflection, empathic reflection, on what it is that on their art. So it allowed a way of getting deeper into your art, and into the feelings that you're trying to express through the art.
Sure. I guess I just thought of a question. How would you explain, if you were going to use a couple sentences, how would you introduce empathy to a group of kids who've never even heard the word before? What would you say to them?
Yeah, empathy means feeling into. So how do you feel into your own feelings, and how do you become sensitive and feel into other people's feelings? So it's really being sensitive to your feelings and other people's feelings.
Thank you. That's helpful.
And then there's a second part, which I would call imaginative empathy, which is you can do acting role play, that you step into someone else's story, and then what are they feeling? Like if you take on the character, like in a play, you sort of step into their role, and what are they feeling? And then you sort of express their feelings. That's like a secondary, what I'd call imaginary empathy.
Okay. That's cool.
All ties in very much with the arts, since the arts are very much about sensitivity and feeling and the expression of feeling, and I think that's what empathy is about. Is that about sensitivity to feelings and be able to express those, and as well as see them in others.
Right. Oh man, thank you so much. That is really, really helpful. That's really all I have.
Okay. Great. So I hope, send me anything if you like, or if if you write up something, I'd be curious, and I'll send you the link to this video too if you want to do anything.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your insight and your time. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, great. Thanks for reaching out and your curiosity.